Friday the 13th, the game. It's a game you might have heard of, or maybe you haven't. This video is here to run through the short but already somehow long history of the game. But if we're going to do that right, we really have to start at the beginning. When the game was first unveiled to the world, it wasn't Friday the 13th at all. A game known as Slasher Volume 1 Summer Camp was unveiled to the world on Halloween 2014. This game had all the signs of Friday the 13th. It was a clear homage to Friday. They eventually even had Tom Savini on board, and Harry Manfredini was on to do the music. And then on February 4th, 2015, it was announced that Kane Hodder would be playing the killer in the game. So after that, there was a lot of speculation that this was definitely going to be a Friday game. And behind the scenes, that's actually what was going on. As the story goes, after some negotiations with Sean Cunningham, eventually Sean offered up the contract for free. So, on October 13th, 2015, the game was unveiled as Friday the 13th. At that time, they also announced that a Kickstarter campaign was officially beginning for the game. It was your typical video game Kickstarter with different tiers, stretch goals, and bonus offerings. All said and done, and including a backer kit campaign, the backing phase ran all the way to March 31st, 2017. This would effectively be the last day that you could back the game or purchase backer exclusive items like the Counselor clothing pack or Savini Jason. Things were looking really good at this point. The game had just killed it in backing. The concept was something people were really enjoying. It was a relatively new genre. All the promotional stuff released for the build-up for the game had people really excited. All the major players were there: Tom Savini, Harry Manfredini, Sean Cunningham, and of course Kane Hodder. The level of involvement, communication, and excitement from Gun Media was palpable. It was for the fans too. The game's beta actually hit #1 in Twitch viewers for a couple of days just before the 2016 holiday season. Everything was looking great for the game. There was a lot of hype, and that hype led to promotion. It was full steam ahead. After all the waiting, we finally had a date. May 26, 2017. While the game would officially launch on May 26, 2017, Gun elected to give early access to select press and streamers, which drew the ire of some of the community and actually started one of the first major controversies the game would face. Co-creator Wes Keltner would eventually give this statement. So why do press members, content creators, and streamers get access to press keys? Well, the press get access to press keys because they are press. But the world of video game journalism shifted big time over the last few years. Content creators on YouTube and streamers on Twitch garner audiences that rival press outlets. So much so that every press outlet streams games on launch day. It's not a coincidence. The press is playing catch up and trying to compete. There was also a minor issue with some of these streamers giving away early access or press keys to viewers, which is where a lot of the complaints came from, and probably the reason why Wes even had to make a statement on it. There were other reasons people were upset about it. Some of the community was upset that players had figured out how to kill Jason during that period, and it had been spoiled. Although I suppose watching those streams totally comes down to the viewer, but that's not really the point. There were other little speed bumps like code redemption issues and a reissue of Savini Jason that didn't work the first time around on PC. But I guess these are everyday issues that arise in this day and age of digital pre-ordering and code redemption. When the game did finally get into the hands of regular players, it was a bit of a mixed experience, but it was mostly a positive one. The game was offering something new and exciting. Working with friends or strangers to complete objectives to get away from this iconic killer. The first time Jason killed you. The first time you actually escaped. Or your first time playing as the masked man himself. But as with most games, issues and bugs started to arise. The biggest of these problems for this game in particular was the lack of dedicated servers on console platforms. Without them, the game's round is at the mercy and sole discretion of the server's randomly assigned host. This has led to a greater portion of incomplete matches to complete matches for players searching through the quick play function, or at least on consoles anyway. The PC version of the game has had dedicated servers since day one, which will become an interesting point later on. But unfortunately, that really wouldn't be the biggest problem the game faces in the early stages. By July 8th of that year, the first major controversy was reaching a fever pitch. A player, known as Dilly Dingus, was issued a ban for what was said to be sexual harassment of a minor while in-game. While Dilly was certainly not without fault, it was actually how the community manager handled the situation that seemed to upset the community the most.
Dilly Dingus posted a Steam review stating the following: "Playing the game with no issues. Actually, one of the people who liked it. Got into a game with some girls who were protecting Jason because they were his friend. They kept team killing people and being jerks. I called them out on it and they got mad that I was calling them out on their crappy behavior. They threatened me by saying they knew the devs and would get me banned. I said, fine, I don't care, stop being assholes. The next morning, I woke up to a big fat permanent game ban. Nice to see how the devs handle their game's community." And the developers, catching wind of this review, did not seem willing to discuss the situation and instead decided to flat out accuse Dilly Dingus of sexually harassing a 12-year-old and other players during his supposed tirade. Now, for full transparency, Dilly Dingus did admit to calling the other players involved several names, and his behavior certainly is not above reproach. He lost his cool and let his temper get the better of him, even to the point of calling one of the players a whore. However, there has been no evidence to support the developer's wholly inappropriate suggestion that he was somehow sexually harassing a minor.
One can see how this led to a lot of mistrust between the game's community and its manager. In time, the Praetorian would be replaced by Shifty Samurai after a couple of quick fill-ins. Unfortunately, the game wasn't only struggling from a PR standpoint, it was also filled with issues. There was constant delays, backer rewards that had to be put on hold until other things were completed. Most of these would eventually be fulfilled, and it came with its fair share of apologies and free content. But the game was always a stained experience because of the many issues. Many fans accused Gun Media of not having their priorities straight. The wrong kind of content was being pushed out. There was also that mode that never came to be, Paranoia. After months of cryptically teasing, Gun Media finally revealed a teaser trailer for the mode, dubbed Who is 5. At this point, Part 5 Jason, or Roy, had not been released, so speculation ran wild. But by January 31st, 2018, which is another date that should be remembered for later, the plug had been pulled on the mode. Wes made the following statement. "Hello, campers. As promised, I wanted to give you an update on the current status of Paranoia. Our goal with this game mode has always been to create a different experience compared to the traditional multiplayer F13 mode. We want it to be unique, scary, and offer a new kind of challenge for our players. We began working on an internal prototype late last summer, 2017, and started playing together, Il and Gun, weekly. The point of the prototype was to test theories and ideas within the paper design doc for Paranoia. Do these ideas work? Is it unique and challenging? And most importantly, is it fun? To put it bluntly, it isn't fun enough." This confused a lot of the community. Why all the months of teasing? Why the teaser trailer if you didn't have something that was already fun and well within the works? It seems ill-advised, even as a non-professional, to get to that point unless you had a solid product. It's these sorts of odd management decisions that fans have liked to bring up throughout the life cycle of the game thus far. And while they would continue to push out more content that was pleasing on the surface, new Jasons, maps, counselors, the game was always sort of stuck at one step forward, two steps back. And unfortunately, the controversy surrounding the game is really the only reason why it's made headlines, other than a few awards that it's won. Chief among those controversies is the story of Savini Jason. So come with me down the rabbit hole. There's been a lot of controversy surrounding this character for several reasons. Savini Jason was intended to be exclusive to backers who purchased him during the backing phases. He costed $5 or $6 depending on your region. But there were several accidental leaks that allowed different players to get their hands on him through different means. For about a month-long period, Xbox users were able to get him through a loophole in the Xbox website. The PlayStation Network put him up for sale for 24 or 48 hours. And over time, DLL hacks were developed on PC that allowed players to attain him that way. There's even been some question about just how much Tom Savini was involved with the creation of this character. There have been several videos and theories that have spread throughout the community over time. And if you look into it, you actually see that there's a lot of valid points being made. West eventually made a statement along the lines of, well, it's a team effort, it's video games, that's how it's done. But even still, there was a certain contingent of the community that felt misled. However, the biggest issue surrounding Savini Jason comes from a certain eBay account that was found to be selling legitimate Savini codes for some pretty outrageous prices. And they sold a lot of them, somewhere in the ballpark of $30,000 worth. And at one time, this was all very well documented on social media. Here's just one example of such. So how does somebody get so many extra codes when, according to Gun Media, they only produced as many codes as they needed to cover backers? After all, this was an excuse given during the time where people were receiving wrong codes for Savini and things like that at launch. They also kind of passively mentioned that that's why they wouldn't be releasing more, because only so many codes were ever going to be produced. So where did the seller get the codes? That was a question even the mainstream media posed. That was one of the few things that this game got a lot of exposure about. Well, in an official response to media, Daniel Nixon, community manager for Gun Media, had this to say. First off, thank you for the information that you have provided. We previously assumed that the backer content keys being sold on eBay were the same as you, a fan who got in early and purchased extra keys. After reviewing the information that you have posted, it is absolutely clear that that is not the case. With some investigation, we quickly determined that the keys being sold come from a theft at one of our distribution partners. The company has worked to resolve the situation, but unfortunately, both we and the company were unaware of the digital portion of the theft until these auctions were brought to our attention. While there is not a never-ending source for these codes, we will be canceling any unredeemed codes that have been affected by this theft. Again, thank you for the effort you put into this and for bringing it to our attention. So naturally, the community started to wonder who stole these codes. As the internet often does, it got to digging, and the identity of the seller was quickly revealed. We had all the information we needed from the eBay account to know the identity of the seller. This information was passed along to Gun Media personnel on February 11th, 2018, and again with updated information on April 17th, 2018. This information was given to Gun via private message. In the passing weeks, information on the eBay account started to change. Information on the Twitter account that was now being monitored had begun to change, and it just looked as though overall that the seller was actually being warned. All of the information is out in the open, really. The identity of the thief is clear. What isn't clear is if Gun Media ever charged him with a crime or not. But given all the evidence that is out there, it does seem pretty clear that this was not necessarily a theft. Whether this is fact or conspiracy theory doesn't really matter. The evidence is there. It's damning. It doesn't look good. It's just not what the game needed. It definitely wasn't the kind of publicity the game needed. But the media took Mr. Nixon's statement at face value, and that was basically the end of it. There was never an update to this story, even though the identity of the thief was put in the open. Maybe we'll never know if the seller is going to be charged with a crime. But we know who he is, and we know he did it. If only eBay scandals were the worst of their worries. Unfortunately, the game had seen more than its fair share of criticism from fans and reviewers in the media alike. The game was generally regarded as buggy and incomplete, despite having some really great qualities. After quite a few updates and changes, some for better or for worse, the game never really managed to get over many of the issues plaguing it. There were the typical balance issues that will be present in any multiplayer game when it gets out into the wild. It's perfectly normal. But this game had a lot of layers to its balance. As an asymmetrical horror, the difficulty of the game heavily correlates to the skill of the killer, or at least the power advantages he has over the other players. That was always seemingly a very difficult balance for the developers to figure out here. One of the earliest major changes to the game was the removal of team killing in quick play matches. While the mechanic is well intended, it led to an easy way for griefers and trolls to take over the game in a very negative way. It was promptly removed in the August 28th patch of that year, which would also add small map variants. It should be noted, however, that team killing is still enabled in private matches. So if you feel like going Tanya Harding on your friends so that Jason kills them instead of you, well, you're in luck. The September update brought the Spring Break 1984 pack. This was a light DLC pack that includes some swimsuits and some emotes for the counselors to use. The emotes included at this time were semi-useful because they could be used for silent communication, however, that would change in time. October of 2017 was a big month for the game. There was some impatience building in the community and people wanted to see some real content. And Gun Media and the development team over at IllFonic really delivered on that front. October included 2 updates, both of which ended up being pretty major. The first of these 2 patches, on the 11th, added the Jarvis House map, Part 4 Jason, and a new counselor, Mitch Floyd, the prototypical stoner who is very clearly, but not officially, Chuck from Part 3. A short while later, on the 25th, we got another patch. This one included Fox, another character from Part 3. The character was officially added after the passing of Gloria Charles, the actress who portrayed her in the films. There was a successful campaign to get in touch with her family to have her character immortalized. It was a nice touch, and a welcome addition to the game. And while this patch would include some cool new environmental kills, it also included a lot of changes that broke a lot of the mechanics of the game. There were issues with interaction locking, both from counselors and Jason players. Trap placement was odd and buggy. There was some sort of rubber banding issues associated with the cars. In many ways, the playability of the game was getting worse, despite everything good that was being added. It's hard to enjoy new content to the fullest if the package it's being put into is a mess. December 18th, 2017 brought us the addition of the virtual cabin and offline bots, effectively the first step in adding single-player content to the game, something that was long awaited and a point of contention for many critics when it came to the value of the title. This patch also saw the addition of another franchise favorite and an absolute must for the game, Shelly. It really wouldn't be a Friday game without the down-on-his-luck clown played by the Friday the 13th legend Larry Zerner. The patch would also include a couple new kills. But unfortunately, this patch may have been the most game-breaking of all. With all the balance issues that already existed in the game, this patch, while attempting to tweak the drop rates of certain items, somehow managed to get things into a state where counselors could be fully armed with 2 or 3 pocket knives and a shotgun within 30 seconds of starting a round. And that's not even a slight exaggeration. Here, have a look. The patch really couldn't come at a worse time. For many, the new year was a deadline of sorts for the game to be in a decent state, and at that point it really wasn't. January's patch would come on the 30th of that month, and it brought us the Pinehurst map in Part 5 Jason, also known as Roy Burns, some new kills, some bug fixes, and of course some new bugs. That was just sort of the way things went. Always 1 step forward and 2 big steps back. It seemed like we were caught in a never-ending cycle of bugs. For every one that got fixed, 2 or 3 more would pop up. Then, on February 5th, 2018, Shifty Samurai posted the following on the official forums. In October 2017, we announced that we would begin working on updating the Friday the 13th the game to the latest version of the Unreal Engine. This engine will allow us to address many problems that negatively impact the game performance, as well as fix bugs that can't be fixed otherwise. It's also absolutely required for us to continue working on dedicated servers for Xbox One and PlayStation 4 versions of the game. We estimate that the integration of the new engine will be completed, at the earliest, sometime in April. The nature of the update means that there will be no regular patches until it is released. Upgrading the engine means touching every piece of content in the game, updating new content that is being created, and needing to retest all core features and gameplay balance to make sure they're not affected. With the release of the latest balance and bug fix patches, we're now able to transition the full team to working on this upgrade. We will be posting regular news updates on our fixes, as well as our plans for future changes throughout this process. We look forward to all your feedback, and we're all very excited for the future of Friday the 13th the game. Thank you all for your patience and continued support. The following day brought us the final patch before this long period of integration. But even still, the game wasn't at a satisfactory point for much of the community. Not only that, but this patch gave way to a major leak. By mid-February, Jason, or Jason X leaks were popping up all over the internet. This was meant to be the final Jason added to the game, as he was teased in other content recently added by the developers. A hotfix was released in an attempt to curb this, but it was unsuccessful. So now, we waited. We waited for an engine update that was promised to be what was needed to get the game to the next level. The claim was that the engine update was the requirement for dedicated servers on consoles, although if you remember, the PC version had them since day one. One would assume then that there's a minimal engine version requirement for dedicated servers on consoles, but that's never been made immediately clear, but we can give them the benefit of the doubt. When the engine update finally did release on May 24th, 2018, some 4 months later, there really wasn't any payoff in sight. Sure, the single-player challenges were finally there, and they're a pretty great component of the game now, but the new engine didn't really fix any of the long-standing issues. A lot of the same old bugs were still present, although maybe they were a bit different now. There was some odd visual bugs. Overall, it felt like 4 months were spent on nothing. Since then, we've had bugs where car escapes are now counting as a suicide, the round would end with players still alive, there's an odd case of Osmosis Tommy Jarvis, not spawning in as the character you chose, you name it. Really basic, fundamental functions have started to break down. This is not a game taking steps forward in any way. Something went very, very wrong along the way here, and we'll probably never know what it was. On June 11th, 2018, BloodyDisgusting.com recorded that production of new content for Friday the 13th the game had been brought to an indefinite end. The game had been pulled into the ongoing lawsuit over franchise rights between Sean S. Cunningham's Horror Inc. and Victor Miller, the film writer for the original Friday the 13th. Long story short, Miller claims he was unemployed when he wrote the first film and is now looking to terminate a grant of rights and reclaim ownership of the property, which is within his rights to do after 35 years. In response, Sean S. Cunningham and Horror Inc. filed a lawsuit against Miller, barring him from doing so. It was believed at one point that the game was untouchable in this case, but apparently that turned out to either be untrue or something changed along the way. Gun Media issued the following statement. Friday the 13th the game has established a loyal and excited fan base over the last year. As a publisher-developer, Gun and IllFonic have made every effort to provide our fans with an authentic and great gaming experience. As many in our community may be aware, a legal claim has been made which could affect all future Friday the 13th intellectual property. Although in the past the game had not been subject to any such claim, new content and material going forward will be affected. An initial decision in the case was expected in October 2017, but no decision has yet been issued. The court review of legal rights is in process, but final resolution may take some time. Until the claim rights can be dismissed or resolved, no new content can be released. When we originally learned that the game fell within the crosshairs of the legal dispute, we tried to balance the creation of new content requested by our fans against the maintenance and bug fixing that our community expects and deserves. We attempted to do both within the limits of the legal case. We've now been forced to accept that the lawsuit makes future content for the game, including alternate play modes, new playable Jasons and counselors, and new maps, unfeasible now or in the future. Although the listed content types will be affected, we remain committed to launching dedicated servers on our console platforms and providing continued maintenance and bug fixing important to supporting our fanbase. So what does this mean exactly? There will be no additional content added to Friday the 13th, the game. This includes Uber Jason, the Grendel map, Jason kill packs, clothing, emotes, and new counselors. Gun. Now this brings up all kinds of questions, but let me break down an important point here. The quote says, "Although in the past, the game has not been subject to any such claim, new content and material going forward will be affected. An initial decision in this case was expected in October 2017. So it seems like October 2017 served as some sort of deadline, or at least at that point they knew about when the deadline was, because they were obviously concerned about that case. Through much of the information that has circulated from the time this statement was made, we can see more and more references to a January 18 deadline for creation of new content. Now it's important to note there's very likely a big difference between when Gun Media licenses a new piece of content and when it releases. The general consensus seems to be the deadline to register new works was either January 1st, indicating the new year, or January 31st, for whatever reason. Perhaps just how the current deal was cut. But we do remember Gun pulling the plug on Paranoia on exactly January 31st, 2018, so that seems a little suspicious if you're keeping track. It seems like at that point they knew that they couldn't release anything into January that wasn't already being worked on. One would just have to assume that the content that came out after the fact was just well within the pipeline and already approved. So maybe there was more of a reason behind pulling the plug on Paranoia than we think. It would certainly explain a lot of the odd choices surrounding Paranoia's promotion mentioned earlier. Why all the teasing? Why all the promotion if there really wasn't a product there? It seems more likely that maybe there was something there, but instead they just pulled the plug because it was too late contractually. So with the legal troubles hitting the game, this is kind of what we're left with. We can speculate about dates all we want, we can assume they knew about a deadline. It seems a lot dependent on that October outcome, so they likely knew around or very close to then that things were coming to a close. It's really a shame that so much valuable time was wasted on an engine update we'll likely never need. Dedicated servers likely won't be needed very long unless they manage to turn the gameplay around and give people a reason to keep coming back, because they can't rely on content anymore. So while Jason's been chained up one more time and sent back to hell, it doesn't mean it's over. Even with everything that's happened with this game, this really doesn't have to be the end. Many of us still love it. Jason has lived on through decades already because of this amazing fan base. If the teams at Elphonic and Gun Media can stick to their word and dedicate everything that's left to fixes and dedicated servers, there's really no reason why the game can't overcome and then succeed. If Gun were to lower the price of the game and then leave it in that sweet spot and fix up the game, eventually the community would do the rest of the work. As long as the experience is good, people will play this game. There are just too many things that are great about this game to let it die a painful death. Jason deserves a lot better than that. Wes and Ronnie really did create a great game here. The way it plays out is still, to this day, probably the best version of an asymmetrical horror out there. As stated in the beginning of this video, the game offers really cool and unique experiences, and it's still a lot of fun to boot up and play after 500 plus hours, as long as the bugs aren't crippling the experience. It's easily one of the funnest and most social game experiences you can have. It's a good game, it just has a lot of layers of dirt on it. The authenticity to the franchise is something they really deserve credit on though. It's still an absolute joy to turn on this game and just listen to it. The music courtesy of Harry Manfredini really is everything to this game. It just wouldn't be what it is without it. Just listen to it. A lot of the ambient sound is pretty great too. That's something often overlooked, but it really is something to deserve credit for here. The sound and the music in this game is fantastic and is a reason in itself to boot up the game. Having input from horror legends like Tom Savini and Sean S. Cunningham clearly had its benefits. Their wisdom and horror knowledge must have been a gift to the team. And of course, we have Jason himself, Mr. Kane Hodder. He really brought Jason to life in the video game. It was perfect to use perhaps the most iconic and ferocious man ever to play Jason Voorhees. His brutal strength really came through in the kill animations, and the fans are grateful for it. Thanks for all the bumps and bruises, Kane. The game really had all the necessary pieces in place. The potential was unlimited, really. It could have reached a point where the game was in a pretty smooth state, and all we could be worrying about at this point would be new maps or new ways of escaping or just adding some general depth to the game. Unfortunately, I never got that far, but it doesn't mean nothing came of it. This game's inspired many great communities and new friendships. That's one of the common threads you see if you look throughout this community. Everyone says, well, at least I got to meet and play with some really cool people. It's actually pretty remarkable. There have been some stories of this game saving people from their depression and anxiety, or helping them come out of their shell and make some new friends. The community experience with this game has been by and large a positive one. There has also been some really great art, some really great dedicated content creators and streamers and hardcore gamers giving others advice. Some are just franchise fans who got back into gaming or into gaming for the first time thanks to this. There are so many unique positive stories within this community. Since the no new content announcement, things have been quite rough. There's been all kinds of stories and rumors about whether or not Gun Media knew about these impending deadlines or not. But really, at this point, it doesn't matter if they knew or not. The plug has been pulled. The time to get it right was 5 months ago when they took all the time to get the engine update done. Now it just is what it is. But from the time of the announcement and the subsequent uproar from fans, there's been a lot of moderation occurring on various social media platforms for the game. There have been attempts to silence facts and opinions, many of which are present within this video. A user posted the teaser to this video on Reddit. His post was removed and he was banned. He had done nothing wrong according to the subreddit's rules. A short time later, the subreddit's rules were changed, and after being called on it, the rules were changed back. The user remains banned though. This has led to many in the community leaving these channels and taking their established communities elsewhere. If your fans aren't allowed to give their honest opinions, eventually they just won't. We live in a time where people can be unusually hard on people creating products for entertainment, especially when there's any sort of fandom involved. But make no mistake, everything stated here comes from a place of caring and a place of passion for this franchise. The goal of this video is never to hurt, embarrass, or persecute the creators of this game. No. The purpose of this video is to show how much your creation means to us. If we didn't care, we would have left long ago. So remember, we're still here. We've been here since the beginning, and we'll be here till the cold, bitter end. Just make mommy proud.